Hello, and welcome back to the Skills Podcast. In the last 2 episodes, we explored mindfulness, not just as a concept, but as a practical set of tools that help us return to the present moment, access our wise mind, and lead from a more resourced place. As we've discussed, mindful leadership begins with a capacity to pause, notice, and then choose a response that aligns with our values rather than our impulses. Today, we're diving into distress tolerance, a core module in DBT and one of our favorites to teach. These are the skills that help us buy time in moments of high emotion or crisis to get through intense situations without making things worse. We'll start by outlining the goals of distress tolerance and then move into 2 foundational skills, the stop skill and the pros and cons practice. Again, both of these are designed for those tough moments when our emotions peak and we get pulled into that reactive state of being. And we'll talk about how acting from that place may bring short-term relief, but ultimately leads to long-term consequences, or can. We love this topic because distress tolerance sits at the intersection of life and leadership. All of us, leaders included, can get caught in patterns that no longer serve us or our teams. These skills teach us to pause before reacting, to tolerate discomfort without acting impulsively, and to rediscover our freedom to choose. So, in short, distress tolerance helps us remember that we always have options, even if it doesn't feel like we do. And with that, let's jump right back in. All right, so let's start with distress tolerance handout 1. And this is where we'll just look at the goals of what we're hoping to work through or work towards. And essentially there's 3 categories here, and there's corresponding skills with each category. So first we'll talk about just generally what distress tolerance is, how to use them in crisis survival situations or crisis situations. The framing of it is, how do we get through those moments, so like those really tough moments or peak moments of crisis, without making things worse. So the intention here is not necessarily to feel better or to change your experience, but more of how do you just kind of buy yourself some time. And that alone can be really helpful. So surviving crisis situations, we'll talk about radical acceptance. And through those, we put those skills together. The kind of third bucket here is talking about this idea of becoming free. And so what we're referring to there is a lot of times when, it could be a variety of different prompting events or things that are showing up that then pull us into just automatic habits and ways of being. So we have something happens, I have this urge, I just go with that urge, whether or not that acting on that urge is helpful or not for us. So kind of that automatic just process that we flow into. And that can be its own form of not feeling free or feeling really constrained by my own emotional processes happening. So I feel this feeling, and even though I want to do something different, I keep doing the same thing. And that's something that can feel like keeps us stuck. So this idea of feeling strong emotions or feeling crisis urges show up, and realizing I don't necessarily have to do something with that, or I can just buy myself time and not make things worse, or I can work on accepting the situation, allows me to see I have more options for responding to the problem. And so that is what we're speaking to here, is kind of more of where that like sense of freedom comes from, or that's the reference point there. And before we jump into material, what I usually have people do here is, when you think about these categories, so if you could see yourself get through tough moments without making things worse, if you felt like you had more tools in your toolbox for helping you accept things, difficult things in your life, and if you felt more emotionally like free, what would be different or what would change in your life? And sometimes asking that question can then help us formulate some goals for how this might be useful for me, or like why distress tolerance is important to me right now.
So just take a moment, and whoever's listening right now, take a moment to do some inventory with yourself right there. Like what's your personal goals for wanting to learn distress tolerance and showing up for this content at this point in time? Okay, so before we move into the main content, we're going to flip to the beginning of the book for those of you who have a hard copy book, and for everyone else who's following along on the PDF version here. This is general handout 1A, so it's like pretty early on in the workbook. Before we go into the core content, it's helpful to remind ourselves of what our options are for solving any problem. And really, this is like meant to be for literally any problem. So not just an emotional problem or a behavioral problem. A recent life problem that I can think of was when I was traveling over the holidays and our flight got delayed. Well, first we sat on the tarmac, then we got out of the airplane. We had to wait, get back on the plane. We had another one that we're going to connect to. We knew we were going to miss that connection. And so here's a problem. Okay, right? Like not ideal. No one really likes to be in that moment. If you've never been in that moment, kudos to you. So imagining kind of being in that airplane or being at the airport, and I think like just as humans and human behavior, and from a human behavior perspective, we initially go into problem solving. Like we are just like wired to like, there's a problem, let me fix it. What can I do? Who can I call? What can I have? What do I need to do to make this change? So lovely, lovely, lovely that we can problem solve. Very necessary skill here. And there's going to be times where we can't problem solve. So like in this flight situation, we called all the right people. We stayed online and on hold forever for an eternity. And it turns out there was no way to fix the problem. Like we were just going to be stuck overnight. So when we can't problem solve, the next situation is how do we feel better, or how do we change our emotional response to the problem? Like, is there anything that I can do to help regulate myself? There's a different way of kind of being with the stress in the moment, another way of thinking about it. And to me, these two are similar, but they're a different strategy kind of skill set. The next option is we can tolerate the problem. So how do I, again, be in this moment without number 4, which is staying miserable, or like to add or make things worse? So just like humans typically go to problem solving, we also are very quick, probably not often with the intention of doing so, but we can be really quick to make things worse. Thinking in my airport situation, if you're yelling at the customer service person and now they're not going to refund your flight, or you throw yourself on the ground and take your luggage out and start throwing things around because you're looking for something. I don't know. You're making a new problem for yourself. I have 2 toddlers, so a tantrum came to my mind. So that's why I thought about that example. So you can think about any problem that came to your mind when I start talking about this. You can think about what does it look like if I was choosing to respond in one way or another, and how do those differ? And again, we all have the tendency to go into problem solving, or we can make things worse. We also probably have trained ourselves or learned how to tolerate things and how to regulate our emotions about it. So we're naturally probably already doing this, but now we're just putting names onto that experience, and then we'll flesh it out and have you feel more resource in each category. So today we're focusing on this tolerating the problem. When you think about this perspective, or when you hear like these options for responding to a problem, what goes through your mind?
Oh my God. Well, it's funny listening to it because I think the airport is the perfect analogy because I was like, oh yeah, we're all
We
out of
need
our
all the
comfort zones
skills.
there. Yeah, we need all of them. For me, well, so the first thing is, yeah, I love solving problems. I'll solve problems all day, every day if I could. So love just acknowledging how human that is for us. And then, trying to like change the problem. I mean, that feels like such a real thing. Like I know I personally, one of my biggest growth edges has just been learning how to tolerate discomfort, especially when you can't get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can't make it end. It's like, okay, well then how can I just allow it to be and trust that it's not going to be forever and, know that everything gets better with time and just go from there,
Right.
So yeah, that definitely resonated as you were talking about all the options.
So hold that framing,
Mm-hmm.
and then let's jump into the first handout of the day. And we'll do distress tolerance handout 3. So, crisis survival skills. I think the most important piece here, or one of the most important pieces when thinking about this specific subset of skills, is that they're really meant to be used in like those high acuity moments. Like I think of these as like, in case of emergency, use these.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because, and I'm gonna say the exact opposite as we move into the skills and I teach them. So I'm gonna contradict myself in a few moments here. There is some truth that some of the skills we can benefit from using outside of acute crises. But by and large, if we just think about them as these like reserve set of skills, one, it gives us a little differentiation of all the different skills that are going to come. And also because if we can sometimes fall into the habit of overusing the skills. So if, for example, every time I start feeling some stress or anxiety in my body, and I register that as, oh no, this is going to be really bad. This is going to be a catastrophe. I need to like get rid of this feeling, or I need to squash this feeling, or I need to totally distract away. This is a crisis. If every time I respond that way, you kind of lose the nuance that every time you feel that anxiety or that feeling in your body, it's not always at 100. Or if you think about like you had an emotional thermometer, if a crisis, like everyone's going to rate it a little bit differently. Let's just say like 75 or higher. We had like a thermometer of 0 to 100. This is when we want to use those skills. So when we're down below or we're at different levels of intensity, there's different skill sets to use. So this part of kind of defining what is a crisis for you, like what does that look like? How do you know you're in crisis? And the second part, kind of like in conjunction with that, if you can define, if you again think about that emotional thermometer, I'll pull up a little imagery for this one later. So 0 to 100. Outside of crisis zones, we can typically find or pull on many different ways of helping ourselves through that moment. And when the higher the intensity of the emotion becomes, the more cognitively inflexible we get. So tunnel vision is a real thing. And we have less options to kind of pull on in that moment. So sometimes that's a cue for me. If I'm like, the only way of responding to this thing is to do the urge that I'm feeling right now, I'm like, ooh, that's usually a cue that I'm in pretty high emotional arousal, or I'm like a higher emotional state. So again, I think what's important here for people is to try to define that in some way for themselves. And depending on the prompting event that activates a crisis feeling, so whether that's like at work or if that's interpersonally in a certain relationship or in some other place, in some other domain, it can look a little bit different. So it's not always, doesn't have to be something that's static and always looks the same. And again, trying to put some words on that or some labels to it will then help you then know when to pull on these skills that we're going to talk through. So this worksheet's nice because it gives you a little walkthrough of like Here's some ideas for when to use crisis skills. So when you have intense emotional pain that can't be helped quickly, when your emotion mind threatens to overwhelm you. So if you go back to the 3 states of mind, remember that emotion mind can give us that sense of urgency, like I have to do something right now, or we can act far out of alignment with our wise mind. You're super overwhelmed, but demands have to be met. This is a common one that I hear across the board of what great times to use these crisis skills. So something happens, I'm having all this emotional intensity, and I have to go run a meeting. And I have to pitch this thing in 5 minutes. Okay, how do we go do that? Or I'm carrying what happened in my day and I'm going back home, and my home is asking of different things from me that I don't feel like I can give it right this moment. So even that can be like that overwhelm tipping point of like, oh, these other demands are showing up and I don't know how to like come out of what I'm feeling right now. So this can be another time where those are really useful. So similar to where I start the third bullet point here, the third section is talking about we don't want to use these for everyday problems or just solving all of our problems. In short. And that will make more sense as we talk through them.
Yeah. And
any questions here? Any reflections here? Just as I'm naming this.
Number 4 definitely resonated for sure. Like, I feel like that is the definition of adulting. Like there's a lot happening and yet you have to take care of something else, right? Yes. How do you honor both?
Yeah.
Navigate both.
Yeah. Okay. So welcome to the first skill of the day. And this one is, if there was ever a skill that is so straightforward, it's the stop skill. And for that reason, I love it. It's very much just like it sounds. Welcome to the stop skill. So we have here this lovely image of a stop sign. And when you see a stop sign, what is that trying to tell you to do?
Stop. Pause.
You got it. Gold star for the day.
Yes.
So I have come to learn to love this skill, but when I first learned a skill, I dismissed it so quickly because I'm like, what? The fact that this is a skill is like insane to me. Like that was my judgment. I was like, what? We're telling people just to stop? Like, okay. If we could just stop, though, we would all just stop.
Yeah.
So over time, I think my love for this one grew as I tried to incorporate more distress tolerance in my life. And then realize that this is like a noble pause. And just to be able to do that actually can buy us a lot of time and can take us a long way. So if we break down the acronym, literally this is asking you to stop. So like as literal as it is, like you're sitting at your desk, like before you make another movement, you just freeze your body, like you're not going to do anything else. And right now, I'm assuming that you and I are both not highly emotionally activated. And you can think about times where you are, how difficult that this can be.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're so quick to move into action, or we got to change our environment or do something, right? So again, seemingly simple, but really hard in those crisis moments. So I tell people sometimes a lot of the practice or building mastery can just be learning how to pause. That's why I call it the noble pause, because it's very noble, right? To be able to do that and implement it.
Yeah.
So one step further, we go into what the T stands for, which is take a step back. So this would be more this is not literal. Could be, depending on the situation. But more figuratively, taking a mental kind of step back from the situation. And while we're doing that, can we maybe take a deep breath? Just take a moment. It says let go. And again, in high acuity moments, very difficult to just be like, oh, I'm letting this go. So a little reframe that I like to say there is, if I'm taking a step back, I'm just trying to change the camera lens. So something happens and I get really zoomed in and like hyper focused. So I think of it as almost like a director's cut. Like you're going to edit this to kind of pull back and change the frame to bring more content into the situation. And I like that metaphor because there's some movement with it, which is different than just like that one direction maybe we're getting pulled to do, or how to like solve whatever just happened. Whether that's effective or not to do what we're feeling like doing. So can I pause? Can I like reset the frame? And then when we're doing that, the O stands for observe. So this would be observing what's going on internally. This could also be observing more of the situation, trying to take in information around from like your surroundings in your environment. I actually really like this practice when we talked about in mindfulness, like open mind or focused mind. Do you remember that, like in the aquarium example?
Yeah.
So if something occurs and I'm feeling really activated, and again, I'm hyper focused on it, if I can take a step back, change that lens, take in information from my environment, it can often help us see that even though I'm feeling this threat or something like really severe just happened, I'm okay in this moment. So like I'm in this room, all the things that I love are around me, or I'm at my desk, like the person that just sent me this email is not in front of me, or whatever the prompting event is. So it can help bring new information into our awareness, which then can help to regulate ourselves. Or vice versa, sometimes we get so hyper focused on that external that we're not just paying attention to what's happening internally. So if I can observe what's going on internally, like, whoa, my breath feels really rapid, my heart's hurting, or like my stomach is not feeling good. Again, just naming and noticing those things can also help to regulate it, make some space for it. And then we put those practices together. So we've stopped, trying to change the lens a little bit. We're taking a step back. We're observing what's happening. And then the next step is the P. It says proceed mindfully. So asking wise mind, how would I like to move forward with this situation? What information am I missing? Like, what do I need to be able to move forward with this? What I love in seeing people practice this skill is a lot of times people will tell me that they get to the P and like, okay, wise mind, how do I want to move forward? And they're like, yeah, go do the thing. Like emotion mind is like still really loud. And I, again, don't see that as like a feeling. I love that. You can observe it. Like, okay, emotion mind is still really strong. I'm going to have to maybe do some other skills or take a little longer of a break, maybe, of course, if that's applicable. And then come back to this question of proceeding mindfully. I also love this part because it's very, hopefully everyone can relate to this, but I feel like socially and culturally, we are just primed right now to feel like we have this sense of urgency with everything.
Yeah.
An email comes in, I need to respond to it right away. Someone calls me, I got to listen to the message right now. I got to get this thing done. I got to, fill in the blanks with whatever your mind goes to. And so it's also just this reminder that we don't have to always be engaging with things that way. And then that question of like, what does it look like to proceed more mindfully? Even if we don't have answers right away, just asking that question is a ground for doing something different, creating the groundwork for doing something different. So over time, as we get familiar with this, hopefully we have some more thoughts percolate in the moment of what proceeding mindfully would look like. So that's a stop skill. I have seen really creative uses of this where people will put like little stop signs like on their desktop somewhere. Like if it's a typical place where they have prompting events, like at work, or people put them in their cars. They have difficulty while driving sometimes. Or if a stop skill is like too red and too abrasive, it can be something else that symbolizes this skill. So is there a way to kind of put this reminder in your environment? So you're more likely to see it the next time you feel this like overwhelm, you feel this really high emotions come on board.
Yeah.
Thoughts, questions?
Yeah. As you were talking through this, at first I was replaying a recent super stressful conversation I had in the morning on a drive. And then I was like, okay, wait, if we're talking about moments when it's acute crisis, like where the stress is through the roof, like, and I pulled one up in my mind where I remember getting tunnel vision in the moment. Cause like, you hear bad news and it's like your whole world just kind of goes down, and I think you're right that sometimes you do sort of like, I know my default is to freeze. So like that part, and I was like, okay, in the face of a crisis, it's like, Dirk. But in the crises where it hasn't been the default, like I feel like I have to jump into action right away. I mean, we've talked about this all the time with leaders. It's like, can we just pause just for a moment before we go rocketing off into solutioning to make sure that we've got all the information at hand, or that we have more context. We don't just assume we know everything. How can we find out and make sure we do,
Yes.
I have a feeling I'll really like this one. I love that tip too, of putting a little reminder somewhere that you'll see it when, especially like in the situations where you're most prone to encountering that.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Post-it notes for myself. So I would definitely put one in a very obvious spot for myself there.
Yeah. And when we're learning these skills, we can practice them out of those high acuity moments. Let's say, I don't know, whatever the first example that was coming to your mind, we're like, well, it's not a top, it's not the very top. I'm not in the red zone yet. But I'm just feeling activated. We can still practice this just to become aware of like, what does that feel like? What does it feel like to just take a moment, observe, take in information, proceed mindfully. And then like what you said, that you notice for yourself that you have a tendency to freeze. I also just wanted to like name this too, that it's really common. And sometimes the opposite is needed, is that we need to freeze less. Or we need to like slow down. We need to shorten the amount of time that we stay stopped.
Yeah.
And so that, okay, you already know what it feels like to just not want to move forward. So then moving, like helping yourself, I guess maybe the growth edge here is like, how do you get back to that proceeding mindfully? So I know what I want to do. Is there any other options for responding to it or moving with it? Okay. So that's a nice segue into the second skill, which is this non-distress tolerance handout 5. So the second skill is creating a pros and cons. So again, on paper, this can sound seemingly simple, and the way we do is slightly different. And there's 2 main functions to this, or I think like kind of 2 different ways of using this skill. What I like to do is have people write this out like really thoroughly when we're not in a crisis moment. And the idea is when we get closer to that red zone, or we have stopped, and now we want to figure out how to proceed mindfully, we can then pull on the pros and cons list. So I don't have to create it in that moment, because as we know, when our emotions get really high, again, are cognitively less flexible. So instead of having the expectation for myself that I'm going to like come up with these like beautiful problem solving and all these different ways of responding, I just look at my pros and cons list and it's already done for me. So I can just review this. And then hopefully by reviewing the pros and cons, it gives us some new ideas and ways of like kind of reminding ourselves of why we want to choose to do something different. So that's like one of the ways to use the pros and cons skills. Now, of course, we can't do that for every prompting event, So you can make this pros and cons list kind of a general responding to crises, or you can do it for very specific behavior. So like when I feel this crisis urge, I tend to do this thing, and that's the thing I'm working on changing. Then you can write this out, the pros and cons list specifically for that behavior. Does that make sense? Okay. So since we can't write them out for every single situation, the other thing that we can do is when we are in crisis moments or close to them, we can go and try to create the pros and cons list and work through it. So before we continue on, can I fill out this worksheet? Again, sometimes harder, but it can also be a nice practice of seeing how cognitively inflexible we are, and then not continuing on until we have really fleshed out the pros and cons. So it can also be kind of a tool to help kind of check in with like, well, where am I in this moment? If I can only see the pros of acting on the crisis urges, then maybe that's my cue. I need some more time before I choose to act in that response, from that response. So how this works or what this looks like, we're naming this as acting on crisis urges. So again, like kind of any ineffective behavior you're trying to change. What we first want to look at is what's the pros of doing that? So this might sound counterintuitive because a lot of times with pros and cons, we think of like, here's this problem of behavior, give me all the cons about it. And what that skips over is that we wouldn't be doing that behavior if there wasn't any pros to it. Even if it's ineffective or like creates harm, or we know it's like not the thing we want to be doing, there's a reason why that's there. So like, like common ones, kind of irregardless of what the behavior is, it's usually easy, or it feels easier, it feels like less effort to do kind of this automatic thing that I've been doing. It's probably reliable. Again, even if I know it's not effective, like we know what the typical outcome trajectory. Usually brings some like relief, or it makes us feel like we're in control. So just some like kind of common pros. So when you ask yourself that question, if there's no pros percolating, I really challenge you to try to find a pro. Like, what keeps me in this behavior? Like, what reinforces this? What's this behavior doing for me? And then the cons, here's a place to write out why, or like, what's the downside of that? What's like the harm that does? How's it not in alignment with your values? Essentially, why do you want to change that behavior? So first category, or first two categories, is doing the pros and cons of acting on that behavior. And then we kind of flip the script here and then say, okay, so you're going to practice trying to do something different. Like I'm going to teach you the stop skill, and then we're going to learn all these new sets of skills. And when that same prompting event occurs and those same urges show up, you're going to resist all of them, and you're going to do something different. You're going to try on these skills. And from a behavioral perspective, we know we have to put the behavior first for then the belief to follow. So here, this is like the practice of overcoming, like kind of resisting the urges to do what I know, and like kind of like trusting, and over time, I'm going to build confidence in what I'm going to try to practice. And we might have practiced a lot of different things to find the next kind of best thing or next alternative response. So thinking about like what's in it for you to do something different. What's the pros of not acting on those crisis urges? And then similarly, what's the cons? So like, what makes that difficult? Why might this be really hard? Because right, if it was so easy, we would just see our problematic behavior and we would just do the other thing. But it doesn't always work that way. So what I like about writing out the cons is a lot of times it can be really just like validating to just name what makes it so difficult. Well, like, oh, yeah, it's unreliable. I don't know if it works. It's a trust fall. Like, I don't want a trust fall right now. I want to do a thing that's going to work. Right? Like, oh, right. So it can be really like normalizing and also very validating to just see like it's hard. This is why this is hard.
That's so good.
Thoughts, responses to thinking about the pros and cons or whatever your behavior is when you think about doing this for yourself?
Yeah, I like the challenge of doing it when you're not in crisis mode, right? Because I definitely know what my default is, the defaults that I like and the defaults that I wish were different. And it was interesting just even imagining, like kind of starting to mentally go through this exercise as you were talking. You know, the main thing that was coming up for me in terms of the pro of acting on the one that I wish was different was like, it's predictable.
Yeah.
In the face of uncertainty, I know this is predictable, even if I feel like crud for doing it afterwards. Like, I'm like, at least I know that in the face of uncertainty, you know, that little part of me that just wants to be safe, you know. With my clients, one of the things that I notice is this kind of binary thought process. Well, either I have to fire this person or we keep them on. And it's like, there's no gray area. And like, and a lot of the times when we're working through it in the moment, it's like, okay, to me as a coach, that's a signal that someone's caught in this like heightened emotional space of like, there's only one option, right? Yeah. It's either this or it's that, you know, that binary thought thing. And then over time, by just kind of like basically stopping, pausing for a moment, pulling back, trying to take in more context and really just like asking, is that all there is? So,
yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
That example just reminded me that, I guess, let me go back to the worksheet when we look at this worksheet. So, you know, I'm naming like acting on crisis urges. And hopefully I said this a moment ago, but again, you can really just swap it out of like acting on, like if the term crisis urge is not landing, like acting on that same behavior or like acting on a specific behavior, doing the thing that you are trying to change. So you can like swap out that terminology. I think that's like kind of makes the scope for this a little bit bigger. And then when we think about resisting those urges to act on that behavior. And that what you said of, observing and taking that information in. If sometimes the first place is just to be able to notice, like, oh, this is what's happening right now. Oh, and there is a choice point here. Right. A lot of times we just move from like, oh, here's this thing happening again. So here we go. We're off and running. I'm like, oh, yeah, there is actually a place where we can intervene and do something different. So the skills that are going to come next are all going to be skills helping us to regulate our system, changing our physiological status in the moment, which then can help make these skills more accessible. So a lot of them, it's like very like, it's nice. It's very bi-directional. Like we can start with the stop skill, use some of the skills that we're going to learn in the next couple of weeks, kind of come back to the pros and cons, or review the pros and cons, use those skills, and then carry forward. So there's more to come that we'll be able to like layer on here. I also like to ask people here to make a little inventory on short-term versus long-term goals. Because also when we write out these pros and cons, a lot of times what we'll notice is the pros of acting on the, that automatic behavior is usually more short-term relief goals or like short-term goals. And then what we forget in those moments where we're so focused on the short term is what we're hoping for, what we're seeking for in the long term. So when you go back to like that resisting those crisis urges, like what's your long-term goals with this? Or like, why do you want to do this response differently? Or why do you want to slow down and really think, is there any other options than just firing this person? Or ripping them a new one right now over email. Like, is there any other options? Why do I want to get myself to do that?
Interesting.
So it's kind of, and another is like because linking us to, something bigger picture. And often those are like in line with our values too. We might see some of our values show up there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last but not least on here. So it says when you are in that overwhelm moment, it says review your pros and cons. So get out your list and read it over and over again. This is where technology is so helpful because a lot of people that I know have their pros and cons in their phone. So it's just like right there accessible or like in the notes on your desktop somewhere. You can imagine the positive consequences of resisting the urge. So again, think about being in an overwhelmed moment. This feels very counterintuitive. Or is it like it literally is like going against your biology. Your biology is like so stressed, overwhelmed, and your overwhelmed mind and brain is going to go to catastrophe. So if we're pausing, we're in the stop moment, and I'm trying to imagine a positive outcome associated with resisting this urge. That is like such a mental game in the moment. Like this is like that's hard to do. And like what a great practice. Right? It's going to feel like going against the gradient of what we're getting pulled to do. And what's it like to just open that door and to imagine some positive consequences of resisting? Or we can pull on like unwanted things. So I like to say, tell people, like, well, play out the tape. Let's say you act on that urge. What's that Monday morning meeting going to look like? Or when you get that call from HR again, are you going to respond to it? So we can also think about those negative consequences to help curb acting on that behavior. Or we can pull on like past times that we've already been through this. Like, oh, right, remember I wrote out this pros and cons because the last time this happened, or like the impact was devastating. Or like that was like a really coming to moment. And I promised myself we weren't going to go back there again. Or like we're working really hard to do something different. And like, here's that moment. So 3 different kind of strategies there to pull on. I think a lot of times we just go to like thinking about negative consequences to try to like shape the behavior, to try to change the behavior. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. So just different strategies, try to pull on that positive ones, or kind of recalling past times to help curb it. I also like once we have the practice of doing something different, so maybe we've resisted the same behavior before, pulling up those memories. So even though those feels really challenging, remember you did this last week? Remember? Remember you talked about with your friend and they were so proud of you? You did the thing? Yes, let's do it again. Like, it wasn't that satisfying and you did it and you didn't make things worse. And that's the goal. So remembering the framing of distress tolerance is all about not making things worse for yourself, buying yourself some time. Okay. That's the stop skill and pros and cons.
Fun. 2 juicy ones for sure.
Both of these practices have worksheets that you can do. Distress tolerance worksheet 5. I filled these in. We'll come back to that next week. So you have these blank pros and cons sheets to fill out. And then worksheet 2 is practicing the stop skill. So like this one helps you, or like it prompts you to kind of rate your level of like emotion intensity, or rating your level of distress, writing out what the prompting behavior was, exactly what the behavior is that you're trying to stop, and then what you did, and then what the outcome was. I love that, and I love documenting this because over time we can start seeing, kind of tracking for ourselves, like, is there recurring prompting events that happen, or is there recurring behavior that I'm trying to change, maybe in different like domains, different aspects. So those are the practices for the week. Any thoughts or anything I can clarify on those two skills?
Yeah, I was thinking about the for the stop skill, for the take a step back piece.
Yeah.
You said like sometimes you can physically take a step back, and I was thinking like, I noticed that I was like, oh, how do you do that mentally? Do you have any tips for like what that could look like? Like maybe it's a question you ask yourself or to help yourself take a step back, you know?
Yeah. I like the practice of describing the prompting event and not repeating back to yourself what happened, like literally describing like the play-by-play book. If you were to like replay the tape, what can you observe, or what did you observe, and how can you describe it? So describing it non-judgmentally, like what are the facts of the situation? That, again, when we're emotionally activated, it can be really challenging. And I think it's a great one that can create some space. So like, oh, this person did this thing to me on purpose. Oh, okay. Said person said blah, 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 blah. And then I felt this. And now I'm having the interpretation that they're doing this to me on purpose. Like sometimes even that can just help create a little bit of space. And then like, again, like that lens shift. Like, is there any other perspective, or what's seeing this from the other perspective? You just change where the camera was focused. What could you see from the other side?
Yeah.
And we might not always be able to know or like fill that in like accurately, but it's just that practice of trying to think about it more flexibly. So again, it's going to be difficult, and it's a great practice to try to get familiar with.
Totally. That's helpful.
Could you see yourself doing either one of those?
Yeah, because the first one you described was basically like the question, like fact or feeling, you know? And I love that question, because it's like, is it an objective fact? Like if I was watching a security camera's footage, is it the fact? Or is it just how I feel? Like I feel like they did that on purpose. Like, do we know that for sure? No. But the facts are, this person said this thing, I felt this thing. It's really hard. They said this, I said that, and then yada, 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 just playing back the facts. Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And if anyone's listening and they're thinking, oh no, but I know that they did it on purpose. Well, welcome to Emotion Minds, my friends. Welcome to your emotion mind.
Exhibit A, emotion mind.
And it's I feel like it's the most difficult to do that with prompting events that have historical significance, or like the same thing occurs with the same person. It's so hard to untangle from those like familiar automatic thoughts. Like they know that this pisses me off, or they're doing this on purpose because this is the way of changing the situation to get what they want, or whatever it may be. So even if we have a really high sense of probability on that one, again, we don't know for sure. So it's just planting that little seed of doubt and just spending some time there with the goal, or if our goal is to not make things worse. So if your goal is to like burn the place down, then carry on. But if you want to just buy yourself some time and not do that, we can practice flexing this muscle.
Totally. Yeah. And
I'm not recommending that people burn the place.
No,
as an analogy.
Yeah, but that's a helpful framing though too, right? Because if the whole point is you're in a crisis, what is the goal here? The goal is not to make it worse.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Now, how do I want to engage?
Yeah.
It could happen in the space of 0.02 nanoseconds, that thought, but still.
And if we go back to the airport example, like this is a real life example, just lived through this a couple weeks ago. Like even using all these skills, I was never like, I am just so grateful to be laying on the floor of DIA right now. This is just like so great. Like it's not gaslighting yourself. It's not being delusional. So, just to, again, kind of come back to name that, like we're not necessarily going to feel better. But I'm just not making things worse. Like it just is what it is. It's unpleasant. I'm not the happiest camper right now. And at least I didn't cuss someone out.
Yeah, you're just embracing the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Or to impulsively buy, $5,000 ticket home tonight because it's the last seat open or whatever. That's not in the budget. Nothing's worse.
That would suck. The regret that would come. I find regret, like for the pros and cons list, I was thinking about that. Like regret is one of the most helpful motivating forces for me, or even just the idea of regretting something is super motivating for me, or clarifying. And so like in that, when you were going through the pros and cons things, I was thinking like, what would I regret doing or not doing in this moment? Because I've learned from things that I regret in the past. And I feel like that's been a hugely motivating or clarifying force for me to be like,
yeah. That's a good example of like another way of framing that is like your long-term goals.
Yeah.
It's like, what do I want my future self to look back on this moment and see?
Yeah.
When we're trying to construct that, we have to start living it.
Kind of like you're writing a love letter to your future self with the actions that you choose in that moment. Yeah. I like it.
Okay, good luck with your practices this week.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you again for joining us today. If you like this episode, please share, follow, and like us on your favorite podcast app. Check us out on social at The Skills Podcast or On Point Practice, and check out our website at theonpointpractice.com. Catch you next time.